is Peter Vincent Cacchione. I'm the son of Bernardo and Anna Maria Cacchione, two proud Italian immigrants who moved to Sayre. Your history folk have asked me to present the story of my life, probably because I stand out as the first elected communist in the United States of America to a major office. Actually, it was the councilman for the city of Brooklyn. So I'm here to tell you my story. Now, I heard you gasp when I said communist, okay? This is not about Joseph Stalin or Pol Pot or Fidel Castro or any of the more recent leaders of that party. This was probably about the earliest days of the communist movement in the United States and around the world. So if you'll bear with me on that, okay? I've been dead for over 80 years, and so my memory isn't all that hot. So it's possible I have to refer to my notes from time to time. I was born on November 1st, 1897. As I mentioned, my father were Bernardo and Anna Maria Cacchione. They were both born in Italy and emigrated and came to live here. Initially, they lived in Syracuse. I was technically born in Syracuse, but I'll deny that. I'm a Sayre person. I'm the oldest of nine. The youngest of nine, you may have known her. Her name was Carmela Cacchione, known locally as Molly. Okay, so I'm not her father, I'm her oldest brother. People have asked me about that. Well, at the time that my family moved here, they moved here because of my Aunt Marie. My Aunt Marie and my mother were sisters, and being Italian, they sort of told everybody where they're going to live. So they moved down here to Sayre and set up shop as a grocer and a bakery. And the two houses are joined together. They still stand. They're on Thomas Avenue. They'd be roughly across from the driveway that takes you down into where the shops were and over to the Guthrie Airport and all that sort of stuff these days. It's a bunch of buildings sort of joined together. You can see where one was a storefront, and that's where the grocery was. It was strange. There was a great deal of enmity towards immigrants. The nation, there was significant movement in the nation that believed that only people who were born on American soil could be American citizens. And there was a great deal of prejudice both against Italians, Irish, Jewish, you name it. And pretty much people were forced to live on the east side if they were an immigrant. Okay, so there was a strong anti-immigration movement, and it was present in Sayre and all through the rest of America. And so that's why we ended up on the east side. That was a curious thing because we got in a lot of fights with the kids who were on the other side of the tracks. Okay, they would break out and sometimes toss rocks at each other, a few fist fights here and there, rivalries and what have you going on, and we'd win some and we'd lose some. And when the group who won, they would come and run up and down the streets on the east side, or we'd do the same thing, go up and down Elmer Avenue and Lockhart Street and get back at them. I was always sort of a gregarious kind of guy. I made friends easily. I was lucky that way. And when it came to high school, and high school, by the way, was located where a bank is right now, but that was the school at the time. And so I was very active in sports. I was a letterman in baseball and in football, and did fairly well. High school in those days, by the way, took 3 years, not 4. But it took me 4. Okay? And the reason for that, I got kicked out. All right? And the principal once called me a nasty slur name for an Italian. I dropped him, punched him right in the face. And of course, they threw me out. What a surprise. But, so I went back the next year and received my degree, high school diploma rather, and was the very first Italian-American to graduate from the Sayre School District. Shortly after that, I went to work as a rivet heater in the shops on the east side. I was 15 at the time. I made a little more than 8 cents an hour. We worked 60 hours a week. But work was, at that time, we're in the early pre-World War I years and all that. It was physically hard, but it was very, very unsteady. They'd call you to work one day, and then the next day they wouldn't. And this persisted for quite some time if you weren't a member of the union yet. But even union members got laid off. I was drafted at the onset of World War I. I didn't have to serve overseas. I stayed put, stayed home, went to basic training, that sort of thing. But by the time, the war shortly ended, shortly after I was drafted, so I never really got called anywhere. But I always considered myself a vet. And I had great sympathy for the guys who really went at it. And that showed up later in my life. My idol, when I graduated high school, I idolized a fellow by the name of Henry Stevens. Henry Stevens was the oldest and most respected engineer on the Lehigh Valley Railroad, and he drove the Black Diamond Flyer. And I wanted to be just like him. He was a very strong union man. When Henry was getting quite old, he lost 15 years seniority because of a broken strike in somewhere in the late 1800s, and he was one of the participants in that strike. And well, it didn't work out for the union, but they immediately lost all their seniority and had to start over, that sort of thing. So as he was getting older, the president of the railroad asked, wanted to give him his 15 years rights back. And he said, no way. He said, I don't want somebody coming around here later, counting up how much seniority you got, and thinking I was a scab during that strike. So that's what a strong union man he was. And I always wanted to be like him. It never really quite worked out. As I got older, as I mentioned before, the work was very unsteady, so I worked in Elmira as a conductor on the trolleys. I worked in a whole variety of jobs, digging ditches and laying brick and doing all kinds, whatever I could get my hands on, that's what I did. And I found myself in the shipyards in Philadelphia, Chester actually, as a riveter, and organized a union down there. Well, they kicked me out. And then I went to work for the Pennsylvania Railroad and was a trainman, and I was part of the Brotherhood of United Trainmen, and they went on strike, and they kicked me out. So I ended up being blacklisted because of my involvement with union movements and all that sort of thing. So that was a little bit of my younger years background. Well, the fun stuff, if once you turned 18 in Sayre, you were automatically registered as a Republican. Okay? And, so what we did, we didn't really mind that, but what we did was we formed the Al Smith Club, because Al Smith was opposed to prohibition, and that suited us just fine. Because we were, frankly, we were sick of the anti-Catholic slanders and sick of bad liquor. So we formed our own club. Well, as I mentioned before, work was really unsteady. So I decided to go out on my own. I wanted to start my own business. And I'd read about the construction of the Hoover Dam and all the work that was associated with the construction of the dam. And I thought, well, maybe we can get work or start a company hauling gravel and material and everything else that they need out there, and that's what I wanted to do. I talked it over with my father. He gave me the old family Pontiac, gave a pretty big boost to my savings and a year's worth of groceries. And I went off. Well, I got to Las Vegas, where everything sort of was happening for this, and turns out that there were probably 50 or 60 other drivers for every job that was there. And so we got nowhere with the company. I had formed a partnership with a buddy. And I got home one night, and it turns out my buddy had taken all our money and sold all the trucks and took off. So there I was, smack dab in the middle of Las Vegas, broke, right at the onset of the worst depression the world has ever seen. So me and hundreds of other people began the trek of 20 miles to get to the Hoover Dam work site and stand in line to see if they'd call us for work. And we walked through the night. It was just dangerous to walk in the daytime through the desert, so we just kept going 20 miles every night, only to find out that there were 20 to 30 men for every job that was available. So we turned around and walked back through the night. We did this several times, and it was pivotal for me. The look of despair these people had was hard to swallow. So I start back, and this was, I was a railroad kid, like a lot of people, so it wasn't all that hard to hop a freight. We knew how to do that stuff. So we started coming back. And it was pretty common. You look out the side of the boxcar, and you see these places, well, they called them Hoovervilles, okay? But these were shacks. They didn't even qualify as a shack. They were thrown together with scrap lumber from packing crates or whatever people get their hands on, and entire families were living in it. You know, you'd go by and you see, I'll never forget, saw one little girl out front. Her arms looked like broom handles. These people were starving. So at every night, we men, mostly the men, would gather around a burn barrel or a campfire or whatever we could do to stay warm. And people would talk about, how did this happen? How did this awful state we're in, how did we get here? And politics of the time, the leadership believed in laissez-faire, which means hands off, don't do anything, don't just let the world fix itself, it'll be fine. There are other people who believe that, you know, some people were born superior to one another, and it's their lot in life to be better off than people who are less off. I later learned it was called social Darwinism. So anyway, I hatched and scabbed and stood in bread lines wherever I could do, and I finally got back to Sayre, and ran across, my sister Marie got a hold of me. And I couldn't face my father. I never went back to the family home. I never called any of my friends. I was so ashamed and mad that I just couldn't do it. So I bid her a goodbye, and I hopped another freight, found myself in Jersey City, and bummed a quarter from somebody and caught the ferry across to New York, and landed in New York. And that's actually where I lived the rest of my life. But I remember going to a municipal flop house, place to sleep. It was just filthy, and it was crowded with people who were ill and all that. As soon as the sun came up, they'd roust us out, grab us, and throw us out on the street. Didn't have time to comb your hair, brush your teeth, and just get out, you know, like you're vermin, you know. So after this happened, and all those other experiences, I started talking about, why do these conditions exist? Why can't they treat us better? Why do we have to exist like this? And a whole variety of things, and I guess I'm a gas bag, so I kept going on about it. And somebody came up to me and said, well, why don't you check out the, trying to think of what it was, it's called the Working Men's League, the unemployment leagues. They weren't unemployment offices as you know them. They were just sort of gathering places for the unemployed to try to share stories about where to find work and how to get advice on how to find work and all that sort of thing. So I immediately got on that, and I went to one that was, I think, in the Lower East Side. And it was there. As soon as I walked in, I started hearing this guy talking, and it was as if he was speaking my thoughts. I was really taken with this. Here's a person who's devoted to improving the lot of the poor, to do something about people who could do so little for themselves. And I was very moved by this guy. So I went to a few of their meetings, and later on, they advised me to go check out the Working Men's League, which was another similar sort of organization, a little bit more passionate. The interesting thing about the Working Men's League, I best tell you stories and you get the handle on it. Like, people would get tossed out of their apartments. I guess I'm being called home.
It's intermission.
So people would get tossed out of their apartments. Old people, because they couldn't keep up with the rent, couldn't, heck, they couldn't hardly eat, let alone pay the rent. So they throw their furniture out and all that sort of stuff. So we would volunteer to put their furniture back in. Okay. And I remember once there was this old woman asleep on a mattress on a snowbank, and I picked the woman up and threw her over my shoulder, and all she did was holler at me for waking her up. But we put the stuff back in the apartment and went. So we had tactics. Okay, these people were doing something. And that really impressed me. They weren't just giving speeches, they weren't carrying signs around, they were doing something. So the way it worked is that somebody gets tossed out, and then all the women, they'd go and they'd start hassling the cops. They'd get in their face and calling them names, whatever they could do to just slow them down. Meanwhile, the men would sneak around the back of the building and carry all the furniture back inside. Now, that didn't always work, but it worked a lot of the times. And there were other ways, in those days, gas meters took a coin, okay? And so we had all kinds of slugs and everything else we could give that, and people could put that in. Some people even figured out how to use ice to slide it into the slot and get an allotment of gas. And there's similar tricks with electricity, although I didn't know much about that. There were a couple of electricians that figured out how to beat that system. So anyway, I occupied a couple of years doing that. And then somebody came and says, you got to learn more about the ex-servicemen's league, okay? These are World War I veterans, okay? And this is where I really had a passion for that, because I identified with these guys, and I went to one of their offices, actually slept on the floor, and then went out and did stuff with the Working Men's League during the day. But eventually I heard about the, just bear with me please, what is known now as the bonus army. Now, World War I vets were offered the bonus pay for serving in World War I. And in 1924, Congress said that they're going to give them extra compensation. Now, this is right in the heart of the Depression. And Congress says, yeah, but you can't have this compensation until 1945. Okay? Well, World War I vets, no way were they going to lay down and be like the derelicts of the Depression. And this set off a march from all over the country. Started in Oregon, some of them did, and they walked all the way to Washington. It's called Anacostia Flats. It's in Washington. So I led a contingent of about 500 and some people from New York City. So we had a very low budget. As you can imagine, we didn't have much money. It was just for food, for goodness sakes. All we did was bread. And so we got to the ferry, the 23rd Street ferry, and we didn't know how to pay our way across. So we stormed the ferry. Okay, bear in mind, these are all military veterans, and they knew what they were doing, and they just rushed that ferry, and the poor ferryman just took them across. Okay? So there we were in Elizabeth, New Jersey, and then because I was a railroad guy, I went and talked to the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, and asked them for some cars to try to get us down to Washington. Well, the foreman, he went and talked to the owners, and next thing we know, they had 12 passenger cars for us to go down to Washington. Those 12 passenger cars ended up in a siding in Linden, New Jersey. So all they did was, backstab us, okay? So we went to the Linden Town Hall and started sleeping on the floor, and the mayor came in and threw us out because he was afraid we were carrying diseases. Anyway, I commandeered a bunch of trucks that, hustled a bunch of trucks and got most of the men on there. I was left with 57 men. Made it to Philadelphia and went to a Salvation Army for coffee and donuts. But they wouldn't serve us because we had black Negroes with us. And I refused to take a sip of coffee. I led all my men away. Racial prejudice enraged me just as much as anti-Italian or anti-Jewish. I hated that, still do. So we bummed our way down, eventually made our way to the encampment on the Anacostia River. Now, I got to read something to you. This is from, he later became president, but it was he was an adjutant to other people as Eisenhower. All right, Herbert Hoover ordered the then encampment be destroyed and scattered away. So he put in charge of that a guy named General MacArthur. And General MacArthur's aide was a fellow by the name of Patton. Now, these guys got to be much more famous later. This is from Eisenhower. I remember the bonus march of 1932. I remember that the U.S. Army was called out tear gas, bayonet, and to shoot World War vets in Washington. I remember the first night when the cavalry came to Anacostia Flats and drove out 20,000 vets and their families. The story was never told, but 2 babies were trampled to death by the horses. A woman's leg was laid open from knee to ankle, a boy's arm was shattered, and I saw 2 men killed. Newspapers asked the police chief about it. He said, well, I told General MacArthur there are women and children among them. General MacArthur said, I know it. So it was a pretty bitter day, and I, again, kind of like the Working Men's League and trying to help people out. This is another thing that really hardened me about the working men and the poor. I was disgusted by what I saw. So I made my way back to New York, and just bear with me a second. So I went back just doing stuff with the Servicemen's League, the Working Men's League, and one of the things that I argued for, there was we wanted to protest. What happened was is that the transit companies in New York wanted to raise their fee above a quarter, and that was a lot of money. So we started a general strike, if you will, protests all across the city, and they froze that rate. They never raised that rate. Well, that caused the leaders of the communist movement to pay a lot of attention to me. I was always good at getting people excited and rallied and moved around and all that sort of thing. So they asked that I join their party. I didn't at first, but I started to read more about it. And actually it was the American Worker was their publication. And in that, I read things that I never knew about how people were treated all around the world. And I began to understand that, this is sort of a, if you will, a struggle between the empire of the poor against the empire of the rich. And I wanted to be for the empire of the poor. So I became very involved with more and more with that. Now, they liked my example. They wanted to put me in charge of affairs in the Bronx. So I did, but I told them right up, I don't want to be, I prefer to be out on the street. I want to meet people, I want to shake their hands, I want to know who they are, I want to talk to them personally. I don't want an office job. So they got an administrator, and then I did my work on the streets. And it didn't take too long. I don't exactly know how it all came about, but they came to me and said, we want you to run for office in Brooklyn. That was kind of cool. Brooklyn at that time was a whole bunch of ethnic neighborhoods all scattered over the place. Okay, so you had Poles here, and Italians here, and Irish here, and you name it. Whoever came to America, they had their own little neighborhoods. Reminded me of Sayre. Not very much. So I willingly went. A short time after that, I met Mary, well, I had met Mary Rosenfeld at some of the workers' meetings, but Mary was an avid Zionist and an avid pacifist. And she was really a political person, as you might call it. And the two of us had a great deal of agreement on things, and we fell in love when we got married. So I was married in 1937. I was 40 years old at that time. And so I loved Brooklyn and went on with that. So then that begins my political career, okay? New York City at that time, prior to my time, there was a place called Tammany Hall in New York City, okay? Not to disparage the Irish, but it was one of the most crooked politicians that ever walked this planet, okay? And New York was pretty well fed up with it. And a guy named Fiorello LaGuardia won the mayorship over, it goes my mind again. It'll come to me 10 minutes after I leave. The previous mayor. What they proposed, what the city council proposed, was something called proportional representation. All right? Now, this isn't a winner-take-all proposition. I'll try to explain this. Let's say there are 6 offices up for election. Okay, say a council. Okay? And 3 of those, let's say there's 100,000 votes for those 6 offices. If 3 of those offices got 51% of the vote, then that candidate under that party would win that election. Now that left the other 6, and those other offices were allocated based on the proportion of votes that they got. So what you have is a system that sort of picks up on all the different facets of the political landscape. And there isn't just 1 or 2 winners. You could have 4 or 5 winners based proportionally on what they earn. So that opened up an opportunity for the Communist Party to have a slot, or to have a shot at the ticket. So it started in 1937. I was brand new over there. And I ran, but I lost by 300 votes. In 1939, they threw us off the ballot for irregularities, whatever they may have been. But bear in mind, people were not all that cozy about communism even back then. All right, even though it wasn't quite the same as we know it now, or you know it now. So that didn't work. But in 1941, I was elected to the office with 48,000 votes. Only 5,000 of those votes came from the Communist Party. People may not have joined formally that party, but they were very, very sympathetic to what we had to say. They understood what they saw every day and how much pain was being inflicted because of our system. So in 43 and in 45, I got the full quota, 74,000 votes. I became a full-fledged member of the Brooklyn version of the New York City Council. Now, I'll go on, and this is where it gets boring, okay? Because this has to do with passing bills and getting votes and raising, dealing with budgets and tax money and all the stuff that puts people to sleep. So I'm just gonna really skim through a lot of the stuff that I proposed. Not everything I proposed got passed. Okay? Because some things people got wind of the sympathy behind my bill. And even though that didn't pass, the larger parties picked it up, mostly Democrats. Okay? One of them is that I passed a resolution, I proposed a resolution that the city of New York do away with publications that were discriminatory. Actually, they were just hateful, okay? One ads would say, white Protestants only, or white, no Catholics allowed, a whole variety of things like that. And so I said, okay, we can't harness the press, but we can tell them, listen, you run ads like this, we won't give you any of our advertising for whatever we have to publish. You can forget about that. We won't do business with you. Well, that sort of worked. A few years later, there was something called the Hart Bill. It got passed into law, which did away with that. Now, it was the same bill I proposed, but like I always said, a good bill is a good bill. It doesn't matter whose name is on it. So that was one. Another one I proposed was, I mentioned the subway fares, but connected with that, we wanted, or I did, to stagger workers, their work hours. This is during World War II now, okay? So that they wouldn't have these big masses of people in line to get to work on the subways or the buses or whatever. And so if we staggered work hours, that would spread that out a little bit. People nodded, liked it. They didn't pass it. Okay. One of the things they did pass is that I proposed that the city provide preschool care and after-school care. The reason for this is the women were working. All the men were overseas, and these ladies had to go to work as riveters, welders. You know, there's a lot of shipbuilding going on, a lot of construction going on, and it was going willy-nilly. And nobody's watching their kids. So that did pass. The city got behind that and set up, kindergartens and what have you to take care of that sort of thing. Anyway, I could go on, but I was motivated. I hated racial discrimination. And the conditions that some of these black women worked in laundries was beyond deplorable. I mean, temperatures were hideous and pay was a joke and all that sort of stuff. So I raged against all that stuff. Well, I died of a sudden heart attack in 1947. And my funeral was attended by over 8,000 people. I was only 50 years old. Now, one last thing, and I sent a letter to a fellow named Mr. Rickey. Mr. Rickey owned the Brooklyn Dodgers, okay? And I got the backing of a whole bunch of my friends on this one. We, the citizens of Brooklyn, are proud of the Dodgers and will support them in the future as we have in the past. But in order to make the Dodgers a stronger team that they are, in order to bring the pennant back to Brooklyn, we will urge Mr. Rickey to sign Negro stars. The Dodgers can win the pennant with these players, but what's more important, the signing of Negro stars would give the war effort in Brooklyn a tremendous boost. The war for the very life of our country. It is inconceivable that Hitler-like ban on Negro players still exists when Negro soldiers, sailors, and merchant seamen are laying down their lives by the thousands in the defense of our country. 1947, Jackie Robinson was signed on as a Dodger. Thank you very much for your attention.